So the goal of tonight's debate is to answer a question: is Christianity good for American politics? So our first speaker tonight is Dinesh D'Souza. Mr. D'Souza is a best-selling author and nationally known speaker on a variety of subjects within American religion and politics. After attending Dartmouth College, he served as a policy analyst for the Reagan administration. Now, Mr. D'Souza is president of the King's College, a Christian liberal arts school in New York City, and has written a number of New York Times bestsellers. His latest book is entitled Obama's America and is a #1 bestseller. Mr. D'Souza also stars in a follow-up documentary on the president entitled 2016 Obama's America, which is now the 4th highest-grossing documentary of all time. This is his 3rd time debating for the Socratic Club. Please welcome our first speaker, Mr. Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here for the 3rd time and to be debating Michael Shermer in this venue for the 2nd time. The last time I believe we debated is Christianity good for the world? And here today we'll be debating is Christianity good for America, but specifically for American politics. Now, in order to consider what Christianity has done for the world, you might begin by asking what would the world look like if there wasn't Christianity? If Christianity had never existed, what would happen to the world? What would happen to America? What would American history look like? What would American politics, not just the politics of Christians, but also the politics of non-Christians, look like if it wasn't for Christianity? Sometimes when we think of secular culture, we think of places like Europe, Norway. But Europe, you only have to walk around to see, is not in a profound sense secular. Europe is drenched in Christian, not just Christian cathedrals, not just Christian art, not just Christian painting, but also Christian educational institutions that have embedded ideals and marinated beliefs into Western civilization that even secular people hold uncritically. If these secular people would burrow down to why they think that, and where does this idea come from, they would see that this idea in its root came into Western civilization via Athens and Jerusalem. In other words, via the ancient Greece and Rome, but also via Christianity, Judaism and Christianity. And remember, even Athens comes to us by way of Rome. In other words, when we look back at Socrates, when we look back at Plato, we read him through 1,000 years of Christian civilization. So even the Greeks, as we understand them now, don't come to us unmediated, but come through us through the filter of more than a millennium of Christianity. I would argue that if you make a list of the beliefs of secular people, atheists, what are the things that they care about? The dignity of the individual, the importance of science as an autonomous discipline and a way to find the truth, the idea of compassion as a social value, the importance of human life, the importance of social justice. If you look at these very secular ideals that right now are at the centerpiece of our political debate, just listen to a relatively secular guy like Barack Obama. Here's Barack Obama, and now he's a Christian, I suppose, but he's not a traditional Christian. I would argue that Obama subscribes to a rather mutant strain of Christianity that I would call third world liberation theology. But nevertheless, if you listen to Obama, his imagery is drenched in Christian rhetoric. One of his favorite phrases is, "We are our brother's keeper," lifted, by the way, right out of the Bible. Now, Obama uses this phrase, he's used it over 50 times, with almost breathtaking hypocrisy. His own actual brother, George Obama, lives in a hut in Nairobi on a few dollars a month, unassisted by his multimillionaire sibling living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So Christianity here is being honored not in the practice, but nevertheless in the principle. And while Obama doesn't impose these principles on himself, some people say, I don't like to impose my Christian morality on others, but Obama doesn't like to impose it even on himself. Nevertheless, he is articulating a principle of social obligation that has its roots in Christianity. It certainly doesn't have its roots in science. Science by itself doesn't articulate any automatic social obligation. Certainly in doctrines like evolution, we can have a possible explanation for why people might be moral, but there certainly is no social justice gospel that comes out of it. Look at a principle as simple as the idea that human life is valuable. Human life is precious. Some people would say human life is sacred. Now, I would assume that secular people take this for granted, but historically, this principle was extremely controversial. It was certainly not affirmed in any general sense, even in Western civilization before Christianity. If you think of the ancient Greeks and Romans, they would have not only mass slavery, but the Spartans would take the unwanted kid, deposit it on the hillside, only to find it dead in the morning. And even the greatest thinkers of ancient Greece and Rome were well aware of this, but looked at it with virtual equanimity, with indifference. Why? Because the idea that every human life has value was at best a very qualified principle in that civilization. So today's idea that we should respect life, that life has dignity. By the way, the idea that human life has dignity is not simply a matter of abortion or euthanasia. It is at the very core of the UN Charter of Human Rights. The whole concept of universal rights comes out of the notion that human life has value and dignity. But why? Why should human life have dignity? Is there anything intrinsic about it that makes it different from the life of, let's say, a horse or a toad or a fruit fly? What confers dignity on human beings and not on those other creatures? Where do we get that peculiar idea? Then we go to another powerful idea in American politics, an idea without which our politics would be incomprehensible, and that is the idea of compassion. And compassion here, by the way, does not refer to the tribal principle that we should be helpful to people who are related to us. That's a universal principle. And in many cultures, anthropologists will tell us that people generally feel that you should help your family. And then beyond that, if you have some left over, you help your relatives, and then your neighbors, and then maybe your kinsmen or members of your tribe. But that's usually kind of it. And if somebody else shows up from another tribe or somebody who's a complete stranger and they have a problem, well, you might want to help if you feel like it, but you really don't need to. It's not your problem. Because ultimately, they're nothing to you. They're not a member of your group. However, in Western civilization, almost uniquely, we have this idea of universal brotherhood and compassion for the stranger who is truly nothing to us. Tomorrow there was a big famine in Haiti or in Ethiopia. You could almost predict in advance the global reaction. In China, a massive yawn of indifference. In India, inaction. In the Muslim world, there's a lot of oil money over there, but there would be no automatic obligation to help. Meanwhile, there would be a big convulsion throughout the West, the European countries and America, churches getting active, food being sent all over the place, Doctors Without Borders, St. Jude's Hospital, and all of this, I'm saying, the secular part and the Christian part. Why are they coming only from Western civilization? Why here? Are Western people inherently more large-hearted than people elsewhere in the world? Nonsense. My point is that Western people, whether they are nominally secular or actively Christian, have been shaped by the same culture of universal brotherhood and obligation to the stranger, and that principle was injected into the West by Christianity. Some of these Christian ideas, I admit, were derived from Judaism, but Judaism, in a way, implemented them in a sort of tribal way, that these are God's truths for our people. And what Christianity did was take those principles and universalize them, giving them a much wider and a much broader application. And now I want to fast forward a little bit and talk about the American founding. And this question sometimes disputed about whether America is a Christian nation. Well, I guess you have to think about what do you mean when you say something like that. Very often those debates degenerate into arguments about how did Ben Franklin go to church and was Thomas Jefferson really devout and what were Washington's true religious commitments. And we can have that discussion. But to me, the question of whether America is a Christian nation is a way of asking, are the core principles of America, and by this I mean its economic principles, its underlying philosophical foundation, the way America conducts its foreign policies, the way America's government is structured, what are the underlying assumptions, and where do those assumptions come from? Think of some features of our government: separation of powers, checks and balances. Why do we have those? What is the need to separate powers? What's the point of it? Other cultures don't have that. You have democratic societies that don't have separation of powers or checks and balances. Why do we have those? Because underlying those is a certain assumption about human nature. And what is that assumption? It was given very clearly in a way by Immanuel Kant 2 centuries ago. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. Which is to say that human nature is a little bent. It's a little warped. And if you give power to human beings in that way, they are going to misuse it, most likely. And therefore, power has to be given, but therefore, let's distribute it. And even distributing it isn't enough, because you can have bargains among corrupt people who say, I'll scratch your back and you scratch mine. So quite apart from separating power, you need third parties looking over what people are doing and blocking them. So if you look at American politics, there's an inbuilt inertia. Sometimes it seems like nothing ever gets done, but that is by design. Nothing ever gets done because we want to stop human nature from having its full corrupt flower. This idea, again, very antithetical to the premise of modern liberalism. The premise of modern liberalism is that liberty is wonderful, and when you let people be free, they will use freedom well. This, by the way, is a principle held in defiance of all known facts. You simply have to look around you to see that many times, maybe most often, liberty is not used well. My friend Michael Shermer is a libertarian. I would argue that the best way to be a libertarian is to reject the liberal assumption that often undergirds libertarianism and to replace it with the Christian assumption that the case for liberty depends on showing how corrupt people and a warped human nature should nevertheless be given the exercise of liberty. How does that work? Why is that a good idea? So I mentioned separation of powers and checks and balances. Let's look for something that was truly bad about America. In fact, America's original sin, many would say, and that's slavery. Now, American slavery was anomalous in some ways in that it was racial slavery, different from, say, Greek and Roman slavery, which was not based on race. But nevertheless, American slavery was common in the sense that it was based upon a universal practice. Slavery existed everywhere in the world from the beginning, the dawn of mankind. Now again, very interestingly, this universal practice of slavery was abolished in only one culture, Western culture. There is no example of an anti-slavery movement outside the West, anywhere in the world, at any time. So again, we have an interesting question. Are people in the West morally more elevated than everybody else? They simply think more deeply? No. They have ideals. They have a set of ideals that caused people in the West to look at slavery, which was, by the way, like the family, an institution taken for granted. For many centuries, slavery needed no defenders because it had no critics. But suddenly people began to look at slavery differently. Now, Michael Shermer is likely to say, well, that's because in the modern era, the Enlightenment came along and people began. No. The anti-slavery movement in Western civilization began in the 4th century. That was around the time that Constantine converted to Christianity. And by the 10th century, there were virtually no slaves left in Europe. Slavery was abolished in Europe between the 4th century and the 10th century, long before the Reformation and the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution and all of it. Now, there was a second anti-slavery wave in America that came later, and that too was led by the Quakers and the evangelical Christians and a whole bunch of guys who said, wait a minute, if we are created equal in the eyes of God, then no man has the right to rule another man without his consent. And if you think about it, this idea, a theological idea, by the way, is now given a novel political implication. For some centuries, some Christians thought that that idea applied only to the next world. But the Quakers and the evangelicals said, no, if we are equal in the eyes of God, we are equal in the eyes of God now. And that means that there shall be no rule without consent. And by the way, if you think about it, this is not only the anchoring principle of anti-slavery, of abolition, but it's also the anchoring principle of democracy. Why? Because democracy, modern American democracy, the democracy we're going to be exercising in 1 month, almost to the day, democracy is based on the same idea. No man, no person has the right to rule another without consent. So here we go. Here is a principle of democracy which is secular, which in no way requires you, when you go to vote, you're not required to subscribe to the 10 Commandments or carry a copy of the Bible. And yet, if it wasn't for the Bible, you wouldn't believe that. You wouldn't be doing that. So in some senses, when we talk about is America a Christian nation, the right way to answer that question is it not a fact, an historical fact, that Christianity has embedded into this culture, even into atheists, a way of thinking, so that even atheist hostility comes out of Christianity. Think about it. Atheists disbelieve in the Christian God. They pretend to disbelieve in other gods, but they don't really care. They don't really consider it even possible that these other gods could be true. On the other hand, they rage against the Christian God because they're afraid of him. Consider Richard Dawkins. The God of the Old Testament, and I'm quoting him here by paraphrase, but it's pretty close to his actual words, is a megalomaniacal, genocidal, fratricidal, homicidal, homophobic, sexist, maniac. Think about that for a moment. First of all, this is very odd language coming from a biologist. Second of all, why would you be so angry about a God that you don't even think exists? Why would you be raving and ranting about if I read about Othello or Hamlet, I might write an analysis for a paper, but it doesn't get me all worked up because I know that this character is fictional. The reason Richard Dawkins gets really worked up is this is the God that he rejects, the Christian God, the Jewish and Christian God. So even atheists are fighting a negative war against the only God that they consider has a real possibility of being true. That's why they have to work to bring him down, because he might win if they stop trying. Now, let's talk a little bit about American politics today. I would argue that American politics today, in all its dimensions, is in the same manner deeply influenced by Christianity, even again in unacknowledged ways. In a way, what we're saying is that secular America is standing on a Christian mountain that even secularists are not willing to acknowledge. Look at America's policies, for example, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, really anywhere in the world, not just now, let's say over the past 50 years. There was a great debate when America dropped 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even though those bombs ended up shortening the duration of the war, arguably saving thousands of not only American, but even Japanese lives. But even so, there's a big debate about dropping that bomb. Why? In any other culture, the dropping of those bombs would be national holidays because of the exhilaration of bringing victory at the end of a long and exhausting war. But here in America, there's no celebration, and this is hotly debated, and it's debated only here. And why? Because there is in America this idea that you're not allowed to deliberately kill civilians for any reason. You are not allowed to target civilians in a war and kill them. You're allowed to kill soldiers, but not civilians. Remember, right after 9/11, American planes bombing Taliban targets in Afghanistan, but dropping rations of food for civilians. Where does this come from? It comes out of the just war theory of Christianity. It comes from no place else. So what I'm trying to say here is, ultimately, I think for Michael Shermer, this will all come down to abortion and gay marriage and gay marriage and gay marriage again, and I'm happy to talk about that. But if you put the bigger framework on things, you will see that our culture and our politics have been decisively, unarguably, historically, and for the better, shaped by Christianity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. D'Souza. Our second speaker tonight is Michael Shermer. Can you hear me okay? It's loud enough? Okay. So, Michael Shermer. Dr. Shermer earned a master's degree in experimental psychology from California State University at Fullerton and a PhD in the history of science from Claremont Graduate University. He is now the executive director of the Skeptics Society, the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine, and the host of the Skeptics Distinguished the Skeptics Distinguished Science Lecture Series at Caltech. That's a mouthful. Dr. Shermer is also a monthly columnist for Scientific American and an adjunct professor at both Claremont Graduate University and Chapman University. His latest book is entitled The Believing Brain: From Ghosts, Gods, and Aliens to Conspiracies, Economics, and Politics: How the Brain Constructs Beliefs and reinforces them as truths. Like Mr. D'Souza, this is Dr. Shermer's third debate for the Socratic Club. Please welcome to the podium Dr. Michael Shermer.
Hi, everybody. How we doing? Let me just set my stopwatch there for you. Okay, we're going. So thanks for having me again. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the ISI for bringing us out here. And my second time here, coming to Corvallis. I noticed something different this time. We drove from Portland down to Corvallis. And I didn't notice this last time, but we were coming down Interstate 5. There's a big Mormon temple right on the left side. You know where I'm talking about? Just right off the interstate there, and which surprised me because this is Oregon, and I thought you all believed in the separation of church and interstate. So is Christianity good for American politics? No. Thank you. First of all, which Christianity? Evangelical, Catholic, Baptist, Protestant, Lutheran, Pentecostal, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons? Which is the right Christianity we're supposed to inform our politics with? There's over 1,700 different Christian denominations in America alone. Which is the right one? Should politicians follow the morals of Mormon Christians, those who hold to the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who believe that it is acceptable to force 13-year-old girls to have sex with men 5 times their age? Is that okay? No, that's not okay. What about Pentecostal Christians who indoctrinate young children into becoming warriors for Christ, willing to kill for the Lord? No, that's not such a good idea. How about evangelical Christians who believe so strongly in the sanctity of life that they blow up abortion clinics, kill abortion doctors, and tell women who are legitimately raped that their bodies will prevent the pregnancy? Should they be informing our politicians on policy? No. Or how about having a politician who is on the Committee for Science, Technology, and Space who thinks the Earth was created 9,000 years ago, just after farmers invented beer? Or what about Catholic Christians whose priestly pedophile program is, in the words of Christopher Hitchens, no child's behind left? No, this is not acceptable to let this inform our policies and our politics. My assessment of religion in general is summed up by how Winston Churchill described Americans. You can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. Well, you can always count on religions to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. Now, on the one hand, it doesn't really matter what religion somebody holds privately, as long as we all follow the principle of freedom. That is, the freedom to think and believe and act as we choose, so long as our beliefs and actions do not infringe on other people's freedoms to believe whatever they want. So as long as religion doesn't in any way interfere with my private life or public life, it's just a private matter, that's no problem. The problem is that the logic of religion is that it leads to belief in absolute moral principles that are true, which means that everybody else who disagrees with you must be wrong, and therefore they must be brought into the line. That is, every knee must bend to the truth. So as long as they don't believe that, we don't have a problem. But as you know, that is a problem. Furthermore, which holy book should we use to inform our politics? How about the Old Testament? Here's a gem for you. Deuteronomy 22, 28 to 29. If a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay the girl's father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the girl, for he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives. Did anyone ask the woman how she feels about this process? Do you really want those kinds of laws and principles of morality informing modern 21st century American politics? Well, that's the Old Testament. There's a New Testament. It's new. By the way, when did Jesus become a conservative? I quote, "And again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." I don't know if Mr. Romney's read that one, but at any rate. Or Jesus said in Matthew 19:24, "If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell what thou hast and give it to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven." That doesn't sound like the conservative rhetoric we usually hear. Or, "I come not to bring peace, but a sword. And if you don't have a sword, sell your clothes and buy one." Okay, maybe that sounds like the conservative, yeah. So, the essence of the American experiment, what set it apart from all other political systems that came before or since, is that it's a secular system, not based in any religion. Secular doesn't mean anti-religious or discriminate against some religions. It just means no religion. Secular means no religion. The state of being separate from religion. So a secular state is officially and legally neutral in matters of religion. Therefore, government laws must have a secular justification. For example, we have laws against murder and theft and rape, not because it happens to be written in a book somewhere, but because we can prove that it does harm. This is why pedophilia is now a crime. We now know that it does harm. It's not because it's informed by some religion. The Roman Catholic Church may have an internal moral policy about, say, not eating meat on Fridays, and Catholics are free to follow this principle if they like. But if you want to make that a law, then you must show that meat is harmful to the public, and then it should be banned every day. The Atkins diet notwithstanding. Let me remind you of a few principles here of our country. The First Amendment of the Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Article 6, paragraph 3 of the U.S. Constitution states quite clearly that there is to be no religious test for office. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Founding Father Thomas Jefferson told the Danbury Baptists on January 1st, 1802, about building a wall of separation between church and state. Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli, read aloud and passed unanimously in the United States Senate and signed by President John Adams in 1797, stated clearly, quote, "The government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion." The Founding Fathers did not put "In God We Trust" on U.S. coins. That was done after the Civil War. Or on paper money. That was done in 1957 as a public statement against communism. The words "under God" were not part of the Pledge of Allegiance originally. It was added by Congress in 1954. Again, concerns about communism. I like the quote from Susan B. Anthony about the problem with putting "In God We Trust" as a national motto. "I distrust people who know so well what God wants them to do because I notice that it always coincides with their desires." In fact, the map of the world today shows that all successful societies have secular governments. Not one theocratical society is prospering. In fact, religions in democracies kept separate are the healthiest way to go. Just think about what you know sort of intuitively as you pan around the world. America is the most religious of the top 19 industrial democracies in the world. By far the most religious. How then do you explain that we have the highest rates of homicide, highest rates of suicide, highest STD rates, highest teen pregnancy rates, highest homicide rates, highest crime rates? If religion is so good for politics, how come it isn't working very well here in the most religious nation on earth? Or just go south to South America. All the South American countries are 99.9% Christian. Well, Catholic, but they're Christians, last time I checked. And they're not prosperous, capitalist, free market countries. They're struggling along in poverty. They also have high crime rates. Or go to Northern European countries, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and so forth, have very low rates of religiosity. Secular governments, of course, but the people themselves mostly do not believe in God. And yet, they are some of the most prosperous countries on earth. By the way, some of the most generous at giving money, donating money to social causes. By the way, on that statistic about who gives money, you have to control for income and GDP. It's an economic factor. Non-Western countries typically don't give as much money, in part because they have less money to give. It's a multifactorial issue, but I just have to point that out. And let me point out, too, one last thing in this first half. Separating church and state, keeping Christianity out of politics, is not just good for politics, it's good for Christianity. Historically, whenever religions and governments have been intertwined, it's bad for religion. It may be temporarily good for the people in the dominant religion and bad for everybody else who doesn't happen to believe in what the dominant religious people believe. But what happens when the majority changes? So think about this. This is already happening in Northern Europe. What would happen if we changed the laws, we enabled the dominant religion in America, Christianity now, to become deeply infused in American politics, in policy, in lawmaking, legislation, and so forth? And say a century from now, the dominant religion was no longer Christianity, it was Islam. This is already happening in Europe. It could happen here. Do you still want on the books laws enabling the dominant religion to inform and control politics? Really? Be careful about what you hope for when you're in the dominant position, because when you're not, you're going to come to regret that. And then let me point out, too, about what Christians believe. Christians believe that a person must be free to choose the true religion, Christianity, accept Jesus as their Savior or not. That means that we must be equally free to not choose that religion. That's what free will in the Christian worldview is all about. You have to be free to choose. If the government is telling you what you're supposed to believe, if the government is pushing the agenda of the dominant religion, you're losing your free choice to make the right or wrong choice about that religion. So if you're a Christian, you should be against Christianity being involved in American politics. It's better for your religion. I should point out that Christianity, one reason Christianity is so successful in America, more successful than Northern European countries, for example, is that we have separation of church and state. We have the freedom to believe whatever we want. Religions are free to do what they want to prosper. Just think about that for a minute. It's good for you. You should vote for keeping your own religion out of politics. I'll go over the slavery thing in my rebuttal, but I want to go over the Ten Commandments. This seems to be a hot button issue. People very agitated and energetic about having the Ten Commandments posted in public places, courtrooms in particular, public parks. I should point out that most of the Ten Commandments postings were done in the 1950s by the Fraternal Order of Eagles, funded by none other than Cecil B. DeMille as a promotional gimmick for his film, The Ten Commandments. That's how that got started. In any case, these monuments represent the government establishment of religion in violation of the First Amendment, and 7 of them would be unconstitutional if they were enacted into civil law. So let's go over the Ten Commandments, see how many you remember. 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. This violates freedom of religion. And by the way, you mean there's other gods? 2, thou shalt not make to thyself any graven images. This violates freedom of religion and freedom of artistic expression, much like the Taliban did in Afghanistan in destroying religious iconography. But what about the Christians who wear a crucifix? You know, you wear the cross. Isn't that a graven image? Can you imagine? I mean, think what the cross represents. It's an instrument of torture. Imagine Jews wearing little gas chambers on a chain. It's absurd. It's obscene. It's obscene to even say it. But I have to say it just to get you to think, yeah, the crucifix, it's an instrument of torture that was used on thieves, anybody, criminals, petty criminals. Why are we wearing that? What is that? What's the reason for that? The second part of the second commandment, For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me. The crimes of the father should be paid for by the son? the grandson, the great-grandson. This is quite unconstitutional. Number 3, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Well, this violates freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and not to mention reduces our vocabulary. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. This violates freedom of religion and reminds me of Dorothy Parker's answer to the question why she doesn't go to church on Sunday mornings. She said, because I'm too effing busy, and vice versa. I had to clean it up a little bit for the live streaming. I'm just quoting. Number 5, honor thy father and thy mother. Compelling loyalty is tantamount to slavery. You can't compel people by law to honor somebody else. Number 6, thou shalt not kill. Like we wouldn't have figured that out on our own. Number 7, thou shalt not commit adultery. Well, this violates our right to privacy, and there goes most of Congress. Number 8, thou shalt not steal. All cultures have moral laws about theft. You don't need Christianity for that. Number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Again, you don't need a holy book to tell you lying is wrong. Just ask the neighbor. Just ask the person potentially affected. I was thinking of stealing your stuff and lying to you or cheating on you. How would you feel about that? They'll let you know. Number 10, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, the neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his cattle, or anything about his that is the neighbor's. Well, at least women were close to the top of the list of property. That's a good start. But really, these are old, ancient, Bronze Age principles applicable to a people living in the desert that have next to no application to modern politics. Again, these kinds of moral principles that inform politics have to be thought out through in a secular perspective. What is the actual harm being done? Why are we doing it? And so on. Now, I need to say something about slavery, and I might come back to it in my rebuttal. But first of all, I should point out that the creator of the universe, at least as he wrote in the Holy Book, didn't even get it right on slavery. This is the simplest of moral problems. Is it okay to enslave people? The Holy Book of the Christians says it's fine. And if you look at the writings of 19th century American theologians, preachers, ministers, politicians, almost to a man, they all justified slavery with quotes from the Bible. I'll just give you a few. Reverend Alexander Campbell, there is not one verse in the Bible inhibiting slavery, but many regulating it. It is not then, we conclude, immoral. Jefferson Davis, slavery was established by decree of the Almighty God. It is sanctioned in the Bible in both testaments, from Genesis to Revelation. It has existed in all ages, has been found among the people of the highest civilization, and in nations of the highest proficiency in the arts. United States Senator James Henry Hammond, the doom of Ham has been branded on the form and features of his African descendants. The hand of fate has united his color and destiny. Man cannot separate what God hath joined. Really? This was barely 100 years ago. Okay, so in other words, it may seem like a good idea to allow our politics to be formed by current Christian beliefs, but look what it did a century ago to the justification of the simplest of moral issues, slavery, and they didn't even get that right. Thank you.
Next, we'll have one round of rebuttals, so each speaker will be able to respond to the other speaker's opening statement. And we'll start with Mr. D'Souza for about 6 minutes.
If we think about slavery and the rationalizations for slavery, they're very transparent. And why? Because actually you don't need explanations for slavery. If people can get other guys to work all their lives for free, this is a pretty good arrangement for the slave owner. And so therefore you've had slavery be so common and so widespread. It is rooted in human selfishness, and it doesn't really require too much of an explanation beyond that. What does require explanation is why people who stood to benefit from slavery turned against it. In other words, historically, there's always been one group that's opposed slavery, and that group is called slaves. So, in every culture, you have runaways, slave revolts. But only in Western culture has there been an opposition to slavery in principle. So here's Abraham Lincoln. As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. Lincoln doesn't want to be a slave, we understand that. But he doesn't want to be a master either. Why not? Where does that kind of principle come from? Where people who stand to benefit themselves nevertheless turn, and not only turn, but are willing to fight a bloody war in which hundreds of thousands of people who could have been slave owners get killed to defend a principle that is of no benefit to themselves, at least not directly. That idea comes out of the principle of human equality, and my point is the principle of human equality is injected into the West and into America by Christianity. If it didn't come from there, where else did it come from? Now, all this stuff about keeping Christianity out of politics. My first question is, why are we trying to keep Christianity out of politics? We don't try to keep anything else out of politics. Are we trying to keep feminism out of politics, homosexuality out of politics, patriotism out of politics, economic gain out of politics? No. All these other things are okay to be in politics. All these other things are okay for you to vote based on. But this one thing, Christianity, you have to exclude. And my question is, based upon what? What makes Christianity so evil, so perverse, that every other principle, their weaknesses are ignored? Take patriotism. Patriotism is a good thing, I admit, but patriotism is susceptible to all those same abuses that Michael Shermer talked about. People kill in the name of their country. People make other people, my country, right or wrong. Do what my country says or get out of here. Why is patriotism okay to belong in politics but not Christianity? So what I'm getting at here is this secularism camouflages anti-religious bigotry. It pretends to be neutral. But it singles out this one thing and basically says everything else is okay except this one thing. And my question again is, why? Michael Shermer is very exercised about the Ten Commandments. All right, let's walk to every museum and state capital of America. You see all kinds of monuments. Monument to Voltaire. Monument to Tom Paine. And that's okay. Voltaire's principles are very controversial, but nevertheless, if somebody proposed to have a monument to Voltaire, it would be debated on the merits. How much does Voltaire done to influence America, and so on. But if somebody wanted to put up a monument to Moses or to Jesus, then Michael Shermer and all his friends would be out there demonstrating. Take it down. Separation of church and state. Now, it's quite possible, in fact, it's inarguable, that Moses and Jesus have had far more influence on American laws and American society than Voltaire, but nevertheless, no debate is even permitted on the merits. This is not allowed at the outset. This is supposed to be really scary. This is supposed to threaten our democracy. And I'm simply saying, putting aside all the nonsense, give me one good reason why we can't debate these issues on their merits. Why can't we say, did Jesus have a good or a bad influence in the world? If all the world followed Jesus' teachings, would the world be a better place or a worse place? Would America be better or worse if it followed the teachings of Christianity? I'm not even taking a position in this debate. I'm simply saying, let's have it. Michael Shermer would have that debate stopped at the beginning. Why? Because Jesus was a religious figure. Therefore, since we have separation of church and state, this cannot be permitted to even be discussed. Now, What about all the stuff about the Mormons and the evangelical Christians and all these different groups, and they believe this and they believe that? There's a fundamental confusion that's going on here. And it's a confusion that goes to the heart of what we mean when we talk about religious liberty and what the founders were trying to protect against. The founders were not trying to protect against injecting morality into politics. Morality belongs in politics. Virtually every serious political debate has a moral component. If you remove the language of is this right, is this wrong, you could almost not have a political debate on any subject. So clearly, morality does belong in politics. The real issue is that the founders were trying to keep theology out of politics while allowing, indeed insisting, that politics be the domain of morality. So in other words, if we're debating the Trinity, we leave that out of politics. And why? There's actually a good reason. Because the belief in the Trinity is in the province of revelation. And therefore, it doesn't really belong in democratic politics because you can't convince somebody else of a principle that is ultimately based on a revealed truth. None of the moral issues depend for their case on revelation. Michael Shermer mentioned gay marriage, abortion. I'll come back to those because my time is up. But the point I want to make is theology, no. The morality that comes out of Christianity, not only is that permitted in American politics, it's indispensable to it. Thank you.
Okay. Why are we so angry? We're not angry. Atheists are not angry. What we don't like is the dominant religion trying to force its beliefs on everybody else that doesn't happen to believe that. We believe in freedom of religion. It's very simple. I don't know if Dawkins is angry or not, but do I seem like an angry guy? I'm not angry about religion. Morality in politics, yes, of course, but we're not debating what is the role of morality in politics. We're debating a very specific point. But I would just generalize about religions in American politics. We just happen to be talking about Christianity because we're in America. But if we were somewhere else, I would I would make the same arguments for any religious infusion into politics. But I would separate that from morality. Of course, we should have thoughtful debates and discussions about the moral implications of public policy. Yes, Dinesh, that's what it's all about. But what is the origins of these moral principles? Where did we get these? So let's talk about that for a second. The principle that human life is precious and sacred. By the way, this isn't my line, but it got me thinking about this, that Republicans are pro-life all the way up until birth. Was that George Carlin? Okay. Thank you. The idea that, in fact, all life, all people should not be treated as a means to an end, but as an end in themselves, is Immanuel Kant's idea. That's an Enlightenment idea. That's a principle that came out of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. So you have the Scientific Revolution, the Age of Reason, the attempt to apply the principles of Newtonian mechanics to all society and the economy and politics, the attempt to use reason and empiricism and experiments to understand the world. That's culminated in the Enlightenment. And the founding fathers of this nation were primarily, if nothing else, Enlightenment figures, well educated in Enlightenment values, reading the great philosophers. They may have been, some of them Christian, some of them were deists, some of them were this or that. That's kind of a separate historical topic that's fun to explore but not relevant here. What happened is that there had to be a secular justification for the moral principle, regardless of what the religious historical influence was on where that principle came from. So again, back to the morality informing politics, yes, of course, but what's the justification? What's your reason? You have to give us a reason. You can't just say, well, it says so in that book. Yeah, it says a bunch of stuff in that book that we wouldn't follow today, so forget the book. Let's see if we can actually reason our way to that particular moral principle. Even Jesus' teachings, sure, let's look at what he said and see if we can reason our way to applying certain principles or not. Not just because he said it, but what are the implications of what he said? Some of it's fine. Some of it, the negative quotes I read, not so good. Why did the West succeed? Okay, this is like a huge topic I can't cover in 2 minutes. Essentially, it isn't religion. If you look at the time frame, the time unfolding, the chronology, religion is almost always slightly behind the wave. They're always like a few decades behind. What does it are the biggest inputs to the triumph of the West are liberal democracy, free trade, and membership in intergovernmental organizations. That is, being involved in the world in a complex way. Evil happens in secret. Transparency, open borders. This is what has driven the West forward and has made us more moral. I can't summarize, for example, Steven Pinker's 800-page book in 2 minutes, but the data set is there. It's quite clear, and religion never leads it. They're always just behind the wave. And that's exactly what happened with slavery. Yes, of course, you can find religious leaders that supported it. William Wilberforce. But who were these anti-slavery abolitionists writing against? Not atheists, because there were hardly any atheists anyway. But it certainly wasn't atheists saying, we must keep slavery going. No, it was religious people. It was the fellow Christians that they were writing against. And it took a long time, centuries. Well, Dinesh quoted 4th century, and it wasn't until the 19th century that we finally abolished it. That's a long time for all those Christians to hang on to that institution. And as I said, it's the simplest of moral issues, and they couldn't even get it right on that one. So, separation of powers, checks and balances, the nature of human nature, these are all Enlightenment discussions. These are all principles that came out of the Enlightenment. So, I'll finish with this. Dinesh said I would bring this up, so okay, here goes. Gay marriage. I'll just give you my prediction. Here's what's going to happen. In about a decade, maybe 2, maybe 3, but I'm thinking 2. This gay marriage thing will be just like the black and white drinking fountains of the 1950s, and we look back now and go, what were they thinking? But that's not my prediction. My prediction is the Christians will take credit for it. They'll find some Anglican minister that spoke out against his fellow Christians and said, you know what, this is not fair to discriminate against gays. And they'll say, you see, that was our guy. Okay, whatever it takes to get there, but just remember that as we live, as this history unfolds, that's what's going to happen. Thank you.
So we'll now move to a discussion section for tonight's debate, for which we have about 10 minutes. I misspoke earlier. The speakers will alternate asking questions of one another, and I will allow for free-form discussion in general. I'll kind of guide as to whether we need to switch who's asking the questions, but usually this is pretty productive just for the speakers to converse with each other. Speakers, please limit answers to 1 or 2 minutes as our time is limited. Also, I'd like to remind the audience to remain respectful of our speakers by not applauding until the very end of the section. And then after that, we'll have audience questions, so just hold all your questions till then. And with that, Dr. Shermer, would you like to start with the question?
Okay. Whoa.
Oh, we have sound.
Sounds like God is here. You know, I was once a Christian. I went to Pepperdine University, and I went around knocking on people's doors to tell them about Jesus. And then I became an atheist, and I went back knocking on their doors to tell them I was wrong. So Dinesh, assuming that you believe that Christianity should inform American politics, which particular brand of Christianity, what principles and where do you get them, say, from the Bible? Which principles would you pluck out of there to inform politicians or policy?
That is a truly bizarre question for this reason. It would never occur for you to ask that question in any other context. In other words, if a union guy asked for a pay increase, you'd never say, "Where are you getting that idea from? What is its source? Are you appealing to reason?" You just assume the guy wants a pay increase and he's going to vote for a candidate that's like him, who's going to give him the pay increase, right? So my question is this. You're asking me which denomination? I say that each Christian should apply his or her own convictions and vote for the candidate that has a set of political and social and moral views closest to what they believe. That's what everybody else does. So why should the Christians be any different?
Okay, that's a good point. I would agree that privately you should vote your conscience. We all do that. But I'm not sure that's what we're debating. Aren't we debating, should it officially, legally inform politics in some way? Or maybe that's not what you mean.
Right, that's not what I mean. In other words, if you look at, you cited a bunch of laws from the Old Testament, for example. Now, as you know, in the very beginning of Christianity, you read about this debate in the Acts of the Apostles. There was an argument among the early Christians about whether the Christians should, not even about others, themselves follow those Jewish laws. And this debate was won by Paul, who said, no. He said, those laws are from the Old Covenant. They were for the Jews, but we're not going to follow them. So for 2,000 years, Christianity has in its practice rejected following the ancient Jewish code. And so I don't understand how educated atheists who should know that go around pretending that Christians today want to stone people and want to beat their children and you dredge these laws out of the Old Testament. They were rejected about the year 30 AD. And you're still talking about them as though we're advocating them in the 21st century.
Well, but it seems like we are, because people still quote from them. And that's why I brought up the Ten Commandments monuments. Why does anybody want to post these in courtrooms and public parks? Because they want to sort of signal, this is what we believe. But you can't possibly believe that. So
well, why not?
Well, you wouldn't endorse any of those commandments being turned into law.
Well, but are you telling me that if somebody puts a quotation by Voltaire on the top of this building, that they are requiring that everyone in this audience follow that law? Is that why they're putting it up there? Is it have the force of law, or does it have the force of stating that America's moral and political and even religious roots are in the Old Testament and in the Bible and in the laws of Moses and Jesus? Isn't that the point?
If we were going to do that, then we would need to include all the Enlightenment thinkers like Kant and Voltaire and so on, who also influenced. So, in other words, we're just talking about historical antecedents to where these laws came from. And we posterize our heroes, okay, but in a legal context, none of that matters. We need to justify the laws on secular values. Wouldn't you agree? There has to be some reason for the law, separate from whatever anybody's holy book says.
Well, let's think about that for a moment. I mean, certainly I agree that if you're trying to convince somebody about why something is wrong, and if they don't share your premise, let's say, for example, I think that abortion is wrong because Christianity prohibits it. And then I think abortion is wrong. I can stand up in a church and preach to fellow Christians, and they might go, well, yeah, you can cite the relevant passages in the Bible and so on. But obviously, if I'm speaking at Oregon State, it makes no sense for me to say abortion is wrong or gay marriage is wrong because of the book of Leviticus. I'm going to get nowhere. So yeah, I understand completely that I would have to make completely secular arguments that would appeal to common reason, but this is nothing more than common sense. The early Christians, when they went out and they encountered the Hindus and the Persians and the Romans, who all had different cosmologies and different theologies, understood perfectly well 2,000 years ago that they couldn't use the same Jewish language. It just wasn't going to work. They had to apply a different way of persuasion. So I agree. Yeah, if a Christian is going to make an argument to a non-Christian, you have to appeal to common reason. But I don't see how you can impose that as a legal requirement. It's not imposed as a requirement in any other context. If somebody proposed laws in any other area, nobody insists that those laws meet some independent test of reason. We simply debate whether the law should be passed or not.
Well, I would argue that's a shortcoming then, that we need to inform our debates with reason and evidence.
I mean, let's look at American politics right now. Would you agree that the majority of people who are voting for either candidate or on any issue, are they most likely voting on the basis of some Enlightenment concept of objective, detached reason? or they're actually voting on the basis of a kind of a molten lava of self-interest, prejudice, anger, this guy looks sick, that guy's a weirdo, which is the reality?
Neither.
Neither?
Neither. No, we know this now. Most people vote by their political party tribe based on what moral principles in general they adhere to. Liberals tend to think we have to take care of the poor, harm care, reciprocity, fairness, and so forth. It doesn't matter who it is. They're going to vote. Okay, Romney's 47% gaffe. It wasn't really a gaffe. The gaffe part was how many pay taxes. The non-gaffe part was he's going to get 47% no matter what. Obama's going to get 47% no matter what. That's political tribalism.
Well, Michael, let's do this. We have some area of political overlap, so this will help us to clarify the principle. We have Obama keeps saying, for example, that people are not paying their fair share, right?
Yep.
Now, we know that about 1/2 of Americans pay no income taxes. We know that people who are in the top 1% pay about 30% of the federal taxes. People in the top 10% pay about 60% collectively of federal taxes. Now, you think that somebody who goes around talking about the fair share would require some reason to say why it is fair that 1/2 of the United States pays no federal taxes at all. In other words, we have no taxation without representation, but apparently 1/2 of the country has representation without taxation. Why is that fair? Right? So all I'm saying is never once has the leading apostle of the principle of fair share, Obama, given a single reason to say why this group should pay this much more and this group should pay this much less. Rather, he simply chants the phrase as though it's self-evident and expects people to vote on it. So where is the public reason that you're demanding of Christianity? Where is it in secular politics?
I agree.
Thank you.
Well, I can just tell you what the argument is. What do you mean by fair? Do you mean fair as in raw dollar amount? Well, Romney paid 2.5 orders of magnitude more taxes than I did. And yet, I pretty much got the same social services he gets. I get the same interstate highways and so forth. So that doesn't seem fair to him. But on the other hand, liberals are defining fair in a different way, not raw dollar amount, but percentage of how much you make and how much you need and that sort of thing. So I would agree we should apply reason to that. But that isn't what happens. It's an emotional, psychological, sort of moral psychology that we vote on. And this would be anti-enlightenment, anti-reason. I think we can improve our politics. First, it'd be nice to have a strong third party so that we have more choices. Go libertarians. But even so, a party that would base the principles on some sort of reason, like let's define fairness. It'd be nice if somebody would do that. So I think we're in agreements there.
Okay, well now let's look at a Christian issue, which would be something like abortion. Now, would you agree that one can make completely secular arguments against abortion?
Okay, I think this comes down to, yes, of course, you could do it. Both sides have tons of arguments, and we all know what they are because we've seen these debates. So I think it comes down to this. You have to sort of do a triage or make a decision. What's the higher moral principle? The right of a woman to choose versus the life of a fetus, okay? And there's no I have not been able to figure out a scientific way to make the decision on that. That it isn't possible to do that. Other than in a moral philosophy argument, you could say an adult woman who's already a citizen and fully functioning has higher moral standing than a fetus that hasn't even been born yet. You could make that argument. I do make that argument because I'm pro-choice. Even though I would personally be anti-abortion, I would not want to do that personally, but as a public policy, pro-choice. And I would use that argument about the moral standing of one versus the other. And also one last point I also use. Historically, when women gain more reproductive rights, it's better for the society as a whole. We can measure that in terms of all kinds of metrics about giving women more freedom and power is good for society, and that's one of the biggies.
Do you believe that Do you believe that the fetus, the unborn child, has any claim to life?
Yes, but the adult woman has a higher claim to life and moral decisions.
Right, but we're not talking about the adult woman's life being at stake.
No, I'm just talking across the board. And again, separating the personal choice. A woman goes, well, I don't believe in abortion, so I'm not going to have an abortion. Okay, fine. Whatever reason. But having the state tell her what she can and cannot do, that's what I object to.
Right, but what I object to is it seems to me that your argument is based on moral evasion. You say that you yourself would not,
Right.
you can't have an abortion, obviously,
Right.
but presumably if your daughter
Yes.
got pregnant, you wouldn't want her to have an abortion.
That's
What
right.
I'm saying is there's only one reason to feel that way, and that is that the unborn infant, the fetus, does have some claim on life.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. That's the only reason to feel that way. All right. Now, once you say that, the argument about choice loses its force. You have to roll the clock a little bit back to Abraham Lincoln and the debate with Stephen Douglas on slavery. I'm not trying some crude analogy between the two, but Douglas basically says, listen, let's be pro-choice. Let each state vote up or down on slavery. I don't care if they want it. If they don't want it, don't have it. So basically what Douglas is saying is let's agree to disagree. We can't make everybody feel the same way. We can't impose our values on each other. Let's agree to disagree. Let's have the pro-choice position, but not on the individual basis, but let each state decide for itself. So to this, Abraham Lincoln replies the following. Namely, choice is meaningless without reference to what is being chosen. And Lincoln says if you are deciding whether or not to own a horse, then you can be free choice because we acknowledge at the outset that the horse has no claim to independent autonomy. But Lincoln says if you say that the Negro is a human being, then the argument for choice collapses completely.
Yes.
Because you can't be indifferent to what is being chosen. So my point on the abortion issue is simply this, and notice that I've mentioned no religious categories, I haven't appealed to scripture or revelation or the Bible. I'm simply saying that this is to me is a good example of how if we're having the abortion debate, so many guys jump up and say, let's leave the pro-choice position, the pro-life position out because it's a religious position. No, it's not. It is anchored in the same secular moral reasoning that you use to justify the other side, but it seems to me to come from a stronger place. It says choice must be based upon the content of choice.
It is a moral choice, and you can make... Yep.
I'll let you respond, and then that'll be the end.
Okay, that's fine. So following your analogy, which is good, a slave is a fully functioning adult human that somebody cannot own. That's that moral principle. A fetus does not have the same moral standing as an adult. And so again, I would, if you have to choose, we have to make a choice about this, you have to vote on it, whatever, I would choose that the moral standing of the mother is slightly higher than the moral standing of the fetus, and that therefore having the state tell a woman what she can and cannot do in the reproductive area is morally wrong, or it's worse than allowing the choice to be made, even though you may personally not want to do that. So again, it's the state imposing its power over another person, an adult person versus the fetus.
All right, so we're now going to move to audience questions. First question from the left-hand line, please.
Yeah, we have, on the one hand, a country of 300 million people that needs to be run. On the other hand, some of us are saying, well, maybe we should all accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have any idea how ridiculous that is?
I'm unmoved by the self-evident absurdity that you're referring to. I'm not sure, what is so ridiculous about it? Why is it different than any other principle? Everybody should help the poor. Is that self-evidently ridiculous to you?
Would you like to refine your question really quick?
Why should we let fairy tales into the United States government?
Is it a question for me? The fact that Jesus Christ should be your personal Savior is not something that we should let be part of our government. You should be very relieved to know. No Christian is advocating that.
That's right. No, the next one. There he is.
I was hoping you could expand a little bit more on what you mean by good for politics.
Good for politics. I think it's for you.
Well, it's for both of you, Jeff. I was hoping to address to both.
Oh, okay. Well, right. That's an important question. What do we mean by it being good for politics? I would argue that it's the metric we're using is, does it somehow lead us to more rational, reasonable policies? Can we get less divisiveness between the two parties in congressional votes? Can the candidates have a reasonable discussion without it being clouded over? I guess that would be the metric for me on whether it's good or not. Especially for those who don't believe it, who are not Christian. Do they feel equally represented? That would be the metric.
I would argue, and even on moral principles where you might disagree with Christianity, it's good for politics because it's introducing an element into the debate that without which the debate would be more impoverished. So let's take, for example, the debate about gay marriage. To some people, the debate about gay marriage is a fait accompli. It's a very simple argument because, after all, we have had a civil rights movement which began with the black civil rights movement, and then along came the women's rights movement, which basically piggybacks on the black civil rights movement and is seen as morally indistinguishable from it. And then along comes the gay rights movement, which, according to Michael Shermer, is simply the third wave of the civil rights movement, morally indistinguishable from the other two, and therefore destined to achieve complete victory, which will even bring the Christians along in its wake.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Now, precisely this kind of thing and the mindless applause that follows it shows that we are inattentive to huge distinctions in between these three causes. First of all, being black is not the same thing as the differences between men and women. In fact, when it comes to men and women, in many areas we have segregation. Recently we had the great tennis tournament, and I noticed that men only play against men and women only play against women. Separate but equal. The very things that we would completely reject in the area of race, we unthinkingly accept in the area of gender because we know that gender is different than race. Sexual orientation is another thing altogether. So, when you talk about something like gay marriage, the first thing you have to ask is, what is the point of marriage? You can't discuss reforming something without looking at the form itself. What's the point of the original thing? Why does society subsidize marriage? Why does society care? Why should society make marriage into a special thing and give it all kinds of benefits? What is society getting out of it? Why don't people just be free to make contracts with each other? So what I'm getting at is the argument for gay marriage is not just about gay marriage, it's about what is marriage. Traditionally, societies have subsidized marriage not because there are consenting adults or because people love each other. It's because society has a direct stake in the bearing and rearing of the next generation. If parents didn't look after those children, the state would be faced with an almost incalculable cost of supporting them. So the point being here, notice again, made no references to the Old or the New Testament. I'm making arguments anchored in reason, but drawing on a moral tradition that has in part been formed by Christianity. So what I'm saying is this. You remove the Christian side of the debate, and we have a thinner, more simplistic, unself-critical debate. Even if you end up disagreeing with what Christianity is saying, it's forcing an examination of something more at the level of first principles. So I would argue that whether or not you agree with the Christian position, and there is no Christian position in an official sense, nevertheless, the injection of Christian moral reasoning into this debate elevates the politics and the discussion of gay marriage.
Next question, please.
This is for Mr. D'Souza. The premise of your position is the claim that Christianity is the root of morality. Wouldn't it be more honest to say that Christianity is credited with melding numerous ideas into one that so far has survived the longest?
I don't think that Christianity is the root of morality, nor do I think that morality in general is the exclusive preserve of Christianity. I think that morality is built in to human nature. When I look at the Ten Commandments, which is, Jewish rather than Christian, but nevertheless, it's not that I discover any moral truth in there. It's rather that I recognize it. I don't go, lying is wrong, adultery is wrong, wow, never thought of that. Rather, I read it and I go, lying is wrong, that's right. Stealing is wrong, that's right. In other words, I already knew. Well, how did I know? I knew because of the moral voice of conscience that is equally present in the Christian and the Hindu and the Muslim and the atheist, all of them. Now, the Christian view is that that moral voice has been put in human beings by God. But whether you believe that or not, no one is claiming that Christianity supplies this type of morality to human beings. Now, there's a different claim.
Mr. D'Souza, could you let Dr. Shermer answer the question as well?
Sure.
We're running out of time. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yep, that's fine.
I'm starting to do the math.
Yeah, so I agree with Dinesh that the moral principles, the moral sense is within. We disagree on what the origin is of it, but that's okay. I think the more important point is it's not that we lack morality. Everybody thinks they're moral. There was a study done on psychopaths in jail who are serial killers. To a man, they all think that the guy had it coming. I did the most moral thing when I killed him. And so everybody thinks they're moral. No one ever started a war that didn't think this was a moral thing to do. So having enough morality, that's not the issue. And again, we have to remember, before, say, 1850, most American Christians believed that slavery was moral. So we can't just go by our intuitions, because our intuitions may be wrong on morality. We have to use reason and have debate with other people to check whether we're being reasonable or not.
Next question, please.
This question is for Dinesh. I just want to say I disagree with you, but I love listening to you talk. You're very slick. I'm sorry. So you said something about that our Greek philosophy has come to us through a filter of Christianity over millennia, but I can read Plato, Socrates, all this stuff directly, their words. So could you clarify? I didn't understand what you meant, how that filter is there.
Well, what I was trying to say is that when we look at Greek society through history, it is almost unimaginably different than the society we live in. You take simply, for example, the simple principle of pederasty, which was institutionalized in Greek culture, not just institutionalized as a sort of eccentric practice, it was actually more prominent in the aristocratic segments of Greek society. And it was actually intrinsic to the Greek philosophy of education. In other words, the older man and the younger boy, in a sense, exchange something, one for the other. And there is an essay in Greek philosophy which talks about how when the younger boy runs away and finds another older man, he's actually cheating the older man of what is rightfully his. What I'm getting at is all of this is so incomprehensibly alien to us now. So when we read it now, what do we do with it? We sort of set it aside. And we talk about the glories of Greek civilization and the wonders of Rome, and we talk about Plato and Aristotle and so on. And what I'm getting at is, we're actually referring to Plato and Aristotle as interpreted by the early Christian thinkers who baptized those philosophers, who basically said, let's read this part of Socrates and admire it, and let's read that part of Plato and cherish it. So we're getting, in a certain way, a lens through which we see the ancients, and that lens is supplied by 1,000 years of Christian understanding. See, it's impossible for us to escape history. right? Just as it's difficult for me to see the world except through the eyes, for example, of a young Indian born in Bombay who was raised by a certain set of parents. They supply lenses to me through which I see the world. I can't escape those, however hard I try. Similarly, I'm saying here in the West, when we look at our own past, we see it through the lens of our later ancestors who helped us to understand the ones that came before. That's all I'm trying to say. We're not getting unvarnished Greece and Rome. If we got it, we would all run out of the room. But we're getting it as it was softened and humanized by the Christians, and that's why we admire it so much.
Dr. Shermer, would you like to respond?
I'll just add one point that, and we should do the same with Christianity. It was a good idea at the time, but we can do better. Let's keep pushing forward.
Next question, please.
So my question is regarding the sacredness of life and how that relates to ethics, particularly the ethics that Dr. Shermer there was proposing about abortion. Namely that if we're talking about the sacredness of life, life is intrinsically valuable. And when we're talking about abortion, we're not talking about questioning the life of the fetus in exchange for the life of the mother. We're talking about the life of the fetus versus the life of the fetus. I mean, the mother's not going to die. So how does your relative ethic there actually even mean anything?
You're talking to me?
Yeah.
It's not a relative ethic at all. It's on what are we basing moral principles and who has standing as a moral agent. Fetuses, yes. Women, even more. And so again, if we have laws that are imposed from the top down by governments, that's not a trivial matter, and so we have to make a moral decision there. And anyway, I explained that earlier.
But Michael, aren't you missing the force of his question? His question is, it's not the life of one against the life of the other. If that's true, then the higher moral standing, even if we admit it, would be applicable. But he's saying it's the life of the fetus against the convenience of the mother.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that it's a higher moral principle for women to have the freedom to do whatever they want with their reproductive choices versus the government controlling it. So there's two different things going on here. There's the life of the fetus, not just the life of the mother. I'm not talking about the life of the mother. I'm talking about the freedom and liberty of the mother, the woman, to do what she wants. That I put as a higher moral principle.
Let's move on to the next question, please.
With the increasing number of atheist and agnostic believers in the U.S., wouldn't it make Christianity redundant in the political arena, meaning that as time passes, that its audience range becomes narrower and narrower as religious views diversify? How about other religions such as Islam or Hinduism?
Which speaker was that directed to?
For Dinesh D'Souza.
Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, yes.
Yeah.
I never got your name right. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, not sure you got my argument right, and that's what I'm more concerned about. Look, all the major religions have certain elements in common. They affirm God as a creator. They affirm life after death. And they affirm a sense of the transcendent. And they say that your life is a cosmic drama. In other words, we're not just material objects in the world, coughed up, if you will, by the Big Bang and evolution. Rather, we're here with a purpose, and our life has meaning. So, ultimately to me, the real question is, how do you want to live? Do you want to live with a sense of cosmic drama? Do you want to live with a sense of meaning and significance? Do you want to have the hope of life after death? Do you want to have the consolation that you'll see your relatives some other time? Do you want to believe in a world where justice is ultimately rewarded? I mean, we don't live in a world of terrestrial justice, right? Many times the bad guy ends up on top. Many times the good guy comes to grief. It's the premise of all the major religions that at some point, maybe in another life, what goes around comes around. So that principle of justice is ultimately affirmed. So to me, that is a deeper, richer, more sublime way to live. The atheist view, by contrast, offers What? That you are an insignificant object in an insignificant world. True, you can try to gin up some significance, but even then you're going to meet the wrecking ball of death, so that all your plans will be blown to smithereens, and that's the end of you and everybody else. If that's an attractive philosophy, man, go for it.
Well, Dinesh, I should point out, that the wrecking ball of death is coming for you too. And you don't actually know what happens after. Nobody knows for sure, nobody. So isn't it more important that we have justice now to the extent that we can?
Yes.
That we do the best we can to have justice? That we make the most of our lives? That we create our own purposes to make the world a little bit better? To help people and so on? Now, in this world, not the next world. Just in case.
We agree.
I'd like to move to the next question if we could. And please, again, hold applause till the end. We don't have much time.
Oh, it's okay.
I'll do my applause now. Mr. D'Souza, earlier, first off, thank you two for coming. Glad to have you. You said earlier that there's moral teachings that you as a Christian have just kind of gone, yes, that's right. And I may be paraphrasing here, but you said also that there's like Hindu moral teachings, and if someone said, yes, lying is wrong, and they were Hindu and they know that's right. And I guess what I mean to say is that the moral pathologies, while they have different roots, they end up at the same kind of location. And so, in an alternative universe, we could be arguing, why is Hinduism good for American politics? Why is Islam good for American politics? Why is Mormonism good for American politics? And if the idea is that the morality that informs our politics comes from religion, and each of them inspires the same thing, isn't the whole idea of, if it's Christian, just rather trivial?
Well, I was about to address that a little bit earlier, and that is that there are two things here. There's the universal morality that's common to all human beings. Then there is the religious morality that's common to all the major or great religions. And then there's the specific historical contribution of Christianity, which brings new teachings into the world that are not universal, not affirmed in other religions, and unique to Christianity. Some of these are principles that actually have to do with the nature of the world. For example, Genesis 1, right? It says God makes the universe out of nothing. Out of nothing. Now, no other religion says that. In fact, in other ancient religions, God or gods fashioned the universe out of other pre-existing stuff. So the ancient Hebrews say, no, first there is nothing, then there's a universe. Modern science, 2,000 years later, agrees that the Big Bang produces a universe out of nothing. In fact, space and time are features of that universe. Now again, you can just, as an empirical matter, compare the discoveries of modern science with the assertions 2,000 years ago of Christianity and decide if they're true. Second, Christianity, in a sense, advances a new idea, very different than the Jewish idea in the Old Testament. That idea is forgiveness. Forgiveness is not the idea that you trivialize the crime. You accept its full force, and yet you let it go. Now, this is a kind of new principle in the world. I don't know any other source for it before it's advanced in Christianity. And again, we as secular people can look at it and go, would the world be better off if everybody operated like that? Would actually this be a way of healing offenses that would be much better than perpetuating them by finding new victims and inflicting new injuries that would then have to be avenged themselves? So isn't this a superior moral principle in the world? It doesn't come out of universal justice. In fact, it violates it. Aristotle basically says that a bad man should be treated badly, not well, because he's a bad man and it is justice to recognize that a bad man deserves punishment. So Christianity disagrees in a very controversial way and says that you should not deny his badness to the least, but nevertheless you should distinguish, Christianity would say, between the man and love him and his bad act and hate that. So this is moral reasoning of a very high order. And it is, again, not universal. You won't find it in Islam. Islam has its own contributions, which we can go into another time. So this is the Christian contribution to American politics, and it goes beyond universal morality. It's specific to Christianity.
Dr. Shermer?
Well, on the gay marriage thing again, when Christians say we love this the sinner and we forgive him for the sin, but the sin is still bad. This is their nature. They're just born this way. So how can they be sinning? They're not making a choice. When did you choose to become straight? This is an absurd question. And you ask anybody who's gay, when did you choose to become gay? They'll look at you like you're crazy. I remember it was 4th grade, and I was thinking, should I go for little Jane or little Bobby? I think I'll go for little... This is not how it works. In any case, and then forgiveness, turning the other cheek, forgiveness. I don't think this is such a good idea. I don't think we should forgive Saddam Hussein after he invaded Kuwait, even if he apologized. I mean, turning the other cheek is not a rational behavior. It has to be in the context of the sinner is truly sorry, repents, tries to make up for the sin, and then you forgive. It has to be contextualized.
When the Roman soldier strikes Christ, Christ doesn't say, nice shot, here's my other cheek. He says, why did you strike me? So he recognizes the point you just made.
Well, good. Well, then we're making moral progress.
Next question, please.
In February of 2012, Rick Santorum dismissed climate change solely based on the Bible. If we had Rick Santorum's way, American policy would be run solely based on the Bible. How can this be healthy for us as a society if he's pointing to the Bible and saying the country, we're not going to be destroyed because it says right here in the Bible?
I'm sorry, I missed the full context of your question. Rick Santorum says what about the Bible?
He said Rick Santorum basically denied climate change in any way, shape, or form solely based on the Bible. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, that's exotic moral reasoning here. I don't know about. I'm skeptical of climate change based on experience, but not based upon any scriptural injunctions. Look, I'm not saying we should have a society that is implementing biblical laws. The Bible, by the way, is not. The Bible is a very unique kind of book. It's not a philosophical book. It's not a book that actually offers reasons. The Bible doesn't say that Jesus is the Messiah because. It doesn't say, the Bible asserts things. But it also has situations, stories, and contexts that illuminate very deep questions in which the examination of the question is more important than coming up with a pat moral principle. The examination of suffering in the book of Job is much better than if the Bible gave you 3 commandments for coping with suffering. So the Bible here is a book of moral examination, moral reflection, and by the way, it's been treated that way. If you look, for example, at centuries of rabbinic commentary on the book of Job, or look at the way that the early Christians from Jerome on through Augustine, on through Aquinas, Pascal, Anselm, have looked at Christianity, it's not in the crude way that atheists deplore. The atheists, in a way, are in bed with the most ignorant fundamentalists. They both read the Bible in the same simplistic, literalistic, unsophisticated way, and they both ignore acres and acres of Christian commentary and thought that actually would deeply enrich our politics if we took the time to pay attention to it.
Dr. Shermer?
Follow the science. That's it.
All right. Next question, please, from the left.
Hi. In my understanding of Christ's teachings, taking care of the poor and the sick were of the utmost importance. And so I was hoping both of you could talk about why you don't think that universal health care is a very important issue to Christians these days. Thank you.
Wow. Universal health care. Well, it depends what you mean by take care of the health of everybody. Yes, of course, we're all in favor of that. Everybody should have health insurance. Insurance goes back centuries, the idea. It's a great idea. The question is, who should pay for it? How should this be paid for? What's the most efficient way to make sure everybody gets that coverage? And I think that's more of a political issue than a Christian religion moral issue.
Yeah, I think there's also the question of, I think the question is often ignored in these contexts is that whenever the government is involved, there's an element of compulsion.
Yes.
And the effect of compulsion is always to strip the virtue out of a transaction. if Michael, if you and I are walking on the beach and I'm hungry and you have a sandwich, and I say, Michael, I'm hungry, give me your sandwich. And you say, yes, here it is. I say, thank you. Now that's a moral transaction. You feel good about having done something good. I feel a sense of obligation. Maybe someday if I'm doing well, I'll share my sandwich with somebody else. But now here's a third situation. You and I are walking on that same riverbank. I'm hungry, you have a sandwich, and here comes Obama on a horse. He gets off the horse, puts a gun to your head, and says, Michael, turn over the sandwich to Dinesh. And so you do. And then he puts his gun back and he drives away. Now, the outcome is the same. I mean, I have the sandwich. But the moral content of that transaction is completely different. You deserve no moral credit. You didn't give willingly. I don't even feel a sense of gratitude. I feel a sense of entitlement. I feel that you actually owe me 7 sandwiches, but you only gave me 1. So you can see how the whole thing is confused when you bring in the element of coercion.
Indeed. I should point out, just for the other side, their argument is that, for example, if we need to fund a military to protect our liberties from foreign countries, and you say, well, but that's an element of coercion, and you're going to take my taxes at the point of a gun and fund these military, and I don't want to do it, and the government shouldn't do that, then we're not going to have a military, and then we're going to be invaded, and then somebody else is going to put a gun to your head. Either way, there's going to be a certain element of coercion.
But even that doesn't fully work because the military does protect you and me both, whereas the taking of the sandwich to you, from you to me, hurts you and benefits me. So my point is any government that robs Peter to pay Paul can obviously keep counting on Paul's support.
Yes. That's the problem.
Okay, let's move to the next question. And from now on, I'd like to keep answers very short. We're running out of time.
Sorry.
My question is for Dr. Shermer. The question here is Christianity good for politics? And you simply stated no. And then you gave some examples of the burning of abortion clinics. My good example is the Westboro Baptist Church.
Your example is what?
Westboro Baptist Church. Of radical Christians who berate and push their ideas on other people. So my question to you is Christianity doesn't state that. Paul and Jesus did not say go out and convert the masses. They said go out and share the gospel. Go out and share what you believe. So my question to you is, are you really saying that Christianity is bad for politics and bad for the morality judgment of politics and the continuation of that? Are you saying that radical Christianity or Christianity terrorism is bad for politics?
Right, good question. So, first of all, obviously, if we put it in context of, say, is Islam good for American politics? We have to make a distinction there. That's the elephant in the room. I'm not really worried about most Christians. I'm not actually really worried about Romney's Mormonism. It just never seems to come up. I'm not worried about it. There aren't very many abortion bombers anymore, it seems, compared to, say, Muslim terrorists, something like that. So yes, of course, we have to put it in context. But note what's happened. Christianity has gone through the Enlightenment and come out the other side much more peaceful than it was before the Enlightenment, whereas Islam has not gone through an Enlightenment yet, and that's the difference.
Mr. D'Souza, would you like to respond quickly?
Well, I agree. I think Michael's conceding that the problem here is, in Christianity, the examples that you give are extreme and anomalous. The Westboro Baptist Church is basically a demented single family it's not even really a church. And if that's the best example you can come up with, it shows you that you're really fishing here you're trying to indict millions of people by pointing to isolated examples. Now, Islam is different because the radical Muslims can win free elections in major countries. Hamas in Gaza, the Islamic Salvation Front in Algeria, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. So radical Islam is a more significant force than what you call radical Christianity, which is a very marginal force.
Next question, please.
Okay, this is to both candidates, and that is, we've heard a lot of discussion about the Ten Commandments, about Deuteronomy and such, and we know that the Ten Commandments were spoken directly from God and were written on stone tablets, etc. But Numbers and Deuteronomy came more from like Jewish rabbis and prophets' interpretation and more of commending this down. So how does this affect how we should discuss it in American political discourse? This is not spoken directly from God, this has kind of gone through a second source, in a sense. How does this affect how much validity we should put on a statement and how much of religion we should consider it to be?
All right. Wow, that was quite a smart question, young man. And thank you for calling us candidates. Don't forget to vote. Well, I think you're sort of making my point, is that given the historical trajectory of where these commands come from and the religious source versus a secular analysis of them, something like that, I think we're better off just dumping them entirely. Don't even let it inform politics. We should just have secular reasons for our laws.
Yeah, but look at the Mormons for just a minute. I mean, this is really an interesting paradox because many people, including many Christians, would say that the Mormons theologically are crazy, that they are a cult, that they believe all kinds of weird and ridiculous stuff. And this creates a paradox. If this is a group of people that believes a whole bunch of weird and ridiculous stuff, how is it that they behave better than almost any other group in America? How is it that we have the best behaved group in the United States that has the stupidest theology that you could possibly think of by universal consent? I don't think it's so easy to say, let's just leave out the one and go for the other. The very fact that the Mormons live so well, look after each other, they practice all the principles of charity that everybody else talks about. They endure suffering very stoically and heroically. It almost recommends a second look at their theology because apparently it is this theology that is motivating them to do these things. So again, here we are, and we're defending Christianity. I don't consider Mormonism part of Christianity. It's a very mutant aspect, if you will. But nevertheless, I have to say, just looking at this group, sociologically in America, a group I'd never heard of before I came to the United States, I do have a certain kind of respect for the way that this theology is lived out by Mormons in the world. So that's worth keeping in mind when we are dismissive of what seems to be very bizarre theology. Christian theology would have seemed equally bizarre and did seem equally bizarre to the Romans when it was first advocated.
Next question, please.
Hi, my question's for Dr. Shermer. If two identical presidential candidates came up identical on all issues, but one was Christian and one was atheist, would you find yourself more inclined to vote for the atheist, or would it just not, flip a coin?
Probably.
Why?
Well, it's an impossible hypothetical. No reason at all. Just rationally, I wouldn't make the distinction because I don't really care. I just care about their politics. Emotionally, yeah, I guess I prefer the atheist simply because that's my tribe, and that's how we all tend to think that way. But that's not a rational argument.
Mr. D'Souza, would you like to respond quickly?
I'll pass.
Okay. Next question, please.
My question is of the same nature, but different vein. Do you find it acceptable or appropriate to vote for a candidate based on religious affiliation alone, as is apparent popular practice in today's America? Why or why not?
Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate at all. We shouldn't be doing that. We do, but we shouldn't. Well, this may be a form of collective ignorance. Collective ignorance is where everybody thinks everybody else is thinking a certain way, even though most of them are not actually thinking that way. And so we may think that everybody thinks you have to say, God bless America. And so everybody says it because they think that's what everybody thinks, even though probably nobody would care if they didn't say, God bless America. It may just be an example of that.
If I were faced with the prospect of voting for, let's say, an evangelical Christian like Jimmy Carter, or a Mormon like Romney, I'd pick Romney over Carter, because I'd ultimately be voting not just about their faith, but I'd be voting based upon what they would actually do. So what are their actual policies? And I don't just mean policies on economics, I also mean policies that really bear on Christian morality. And so once again, we return to the paradox that actually, from my point of view, Romney, the Mormon, would be a stronger guardian of the Christian principles that I would be concerned about than Jimmy Carter, even though he's built a lot more houses for Habitat for Humanity and might have spent a great deal more time in a Christian church. This is a very hard principle for many Christians, because they're looking at Romney's beliefs and his theology and saying, how can I vote for this guy? Even though on issue after issue after issue after issue, he's on their side.
So you would say it's not acceptable practice?
Well, people are free to, I mean, if you're a black and you say, I'm going to vote for Obama because he's black, you're free to do that. I'm not saying that that's illegitimate. But I'm saying if you're black, it would be reasonable also to ask, listen, black wealth has been decimated under Obama. Many blacks have no wealth left except their car. Black unemployment is twice white unemployment. So those factors should be kicked in. Otherwise, you might be actually voting for a guy who's subverting the welfare of the group that you're trying to promote.
Next question, please, if we could.
For Dr. Shermer. Basically, I would just like to ask, you in your opening statement attempted to define Christianity through like a list of atrocities that the church has committed, and I would like to define Christianity from James 1:27 in the Bible. It says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself pure from being polluted by the world. And so with that definition of Christianity and with the teachings of Jesus Christ, would you still assert that Christianity is bad or destructive in politics?
Yes, because although you can find passages like that sound nice, Jesus, meek and mild, yes, that was part of Jesus, but there was also the, get the sword, and I come not for peace, but for, the sword and all that. Okay, so you're just picking and choosing. Just dump the whole thing, and let's use reason in our politics.
Mr. D'Souza?
Well, in listening to this debate, you've noticed that we're arguing in the vocabulary of reason. And by that I mean we're both trying to give justifications for what we believe. There is no capital R reason apart from the actual reasons that Michael and I are giving for particular policies. So what I think Michael Shermer is advocating is a phantasm. He pretends that there is some capital R reason where if we all left aside our faith and our prejudices and our beliefs and our this and our that, we could all then subscribe to this capital R reason, and when the mechanism of reason is put into play, problems will then begin to be solved. Logical theorems would dictate tax policy and economic policy and foreign policy. It's all nonsense. There is no capital R reason that allows us to automatically solve our problems, which often don't come out of a failure of reason, but because of differences of interests between the capitalist and the union guy, between young people who are saving for their own retirement and old people who want those young people to pay more. Our political conflicts don't come out of a lack of logic. They come out of the fact that people have competing values, competing interests, and democracy is the messy process of sorting those out. Your religious faith, your priorities are part of that mix. And there seems to be, I've seen no reason given today for why they shouldn't be.
Next question, please. And it looks like we have about 2 or 3 minutes for the next 4 folks who I'd like everybody to answer. So just address your question to one speaker if you could, and just have a quick answer, and then we'll get to closing statements so you can all go home.
This is for Mr. Sherman. I wanted to ask you, you had touched a bit on, why Christianity isn't important in policies and government, yet when we look in our past and how our nation was founded, our founding fathers believed in Christianity. So how come that isn't important in government and policy? If Christianity was what started this nation, then how come it shouldn't be involved in government right now?
Right. Well, that's why I started my opening statement by saying that we're not a Christian nation. Our founders were mostly deists or loosely believers in God, but nothing like what an evangelical would believe today, for example. So things have changed a lot. So I don't even think the premise is correct.
Actually, Jefferson, in his monument, quotes God almost in all sides of the wall.
Of course, Jefferson quotes God, yeah. Really what he meant was a universal lawgiver of the laws of nature, which could be whatever you want. Like when Einstein says, Hawking says, well, know the mind of God. He doesn't mean God, Yahweh. He just means, the laws of nature. That's what Jefferson meant. Now, some of the others were not deists like Jefferson, but my point is it doesn't really matter. They were constructing a constitution that was secular in nature that had nothing to do with religion. It doesn't matter what your religions are. These are the laws of this nation. If you live here, this is how you have to live, period. It doesn't matter if you're an atheist or a Buddhist or a Hindu or Christian. It doesn't matter. These are our values.
Mr. D'Souza, you began with humans are bent or inherently morally imperfect. In the sandwich reference, you presumably believe that Obama should not hold the metaphorical gun to Sherman's head, that he will share that sandwich freely. If humans are not inherently moral, how is this a valid expectation, and why should Obama not hold the gun to Sherman's head, so to speak?
Mr. D'Souza?
Because the guy holding the gun is no better than the guy to whose head he's holding it to. So in other words, sure, Michael Shermer may be a selfish guy who wants to keep his sandwich. But nevertheless, let's consider the motives of the guy with the gun. Is he contributing his own sandwich? No. He's taking Michael Shermer's sandwich and giving it to someone else and then proclaiming himself to be a morally wonderful human being. Look, I'm not denying the core principle involved here, right? I'm simply saying that here we are as a country, and for 2 centuries we've had people pulling the wagon. And we recognize, and I would agree, that there is a group of people, and you can disagree about how many, but I would say about 10% of people who are weak and disadvantaged and need to sit in the wagon and have the rest of us pull that wagon. Okay? Now, again, you can disagree about how many people should be in the wagon, but that number of people has been increasing considerably. This was kind of what Romney's getting at, that at some point there are more people in the wagon than there are pulling. And then people who are pulling begin to think, well, maybe I should stop pulling and get in the wagon. It's kind of nicer in the wagon. And what my criticism of Obama is, instead of saying, listen, I really want to thank the people who are pulling the wagon, he goes, the people who are pulling the wagon are greedy, selfish, and materialistic. And the people sitting in the wagon are wonderful. He is morally demonizing the wagon pullers and championing the superior morality of the guys who are sitting in there. And all I'm saying is this is an inverted morality. The guys who are actually contributing to help the disadvantaged, these are the sacrificial people of our society, and they're the ones who deserve a little more credit.
Next question, please.
My question is for Mr. D'Souza. A lot of policymakers and a lot of voters believe that the nation of Israel is favored by God and that they have a scriptural obligation to support them even if it's not conducive to the advancement of American interests. Do you think that those type of inflexible scriptural considerations should have an impact on the development of foreign policy or public policy as a whole?
I would say in general, no. Because, look, what you're dealing with here is essentially an interpretation of Bible prophecy. And even the Bible is very cautious about how you approach these kinds of issues. The Bible is very careful to say things like, no one knows when the end times are coming. So it cautions against its own prophetic statements, and it disguises those prophetic statements in the most difficult way. The book of Revelation, for example. So for this reason, I think it's, look, there's nothing wrong in anyone interpreting the Bible however they want, and voting based on that. You can't tell people on what basis they themselves should vote. But if you're asking me that in the debate about public reason, or in discussing Israel's foreign policy, or whether America should support the 67 borders or not, if that problem can be solved by appealing to Bible prophecy, I would say no. Now, for a lot of evangelical Christians, it's not about prophecy. It's just about the idea that Israel is a providential nation. By the way, there are a lot of American presidents who believe that America is a providential nation. And I don't just mean Reagan. This was a belief of Lincoln. It was a belief to some degree of Washington. I don't think what they meant by that is the crude idea that sort of God is sort of playing favorites. I think what they meant is that God has a sort of special destiny for America and the world, that America would come up with something new that would actually help the world. And viewed in that sense, I think that kind of providential understanding is fine. So the same thing, if you believe, for example, that Israel is a special kind of country...
I'm sorry to cut you off, but could we move to the last question?
I think I've covered my main point.
Right.
Shermer, and you made a point about like if I'm a woman and I had a baby inside me, how I have moral superiority over them. And the main differences between me and the baby inside me would be their inability to benefit society or speak for themselves, or a lot of those things. They're still, if they're a human, like I would argue, then you could take that same scenario and apply it to someone who is mentally disabled. They could not benefit society or speak for themselves. Does that give me higher moral superiority over them, and therefore the ability to choose to kill them if I wanted to because my choice was more valuable than their life?
How mentally retarded are we talking about here? Just kidding. It's easy. Okay, that's not quite the argument I'm making. That there's a gradation from the fertilized cell all the way up to birth. And that as you go along, the moral standing gets higher and higher, but never before birth trumping the right of the mother, the woman, to make the choice versus the government making the choice for her. Once you're born and you're a citizen and so forth, you have all the rights that come with the Constitution and your citizenship and so forth and so on. I agree with that. So I'm just saying that you get to choose, not a bunch of congressmen. You make the choice. That's a higher moral principle. Not that you should get an abortion. You should choose what you want to do. The choice, the liberty, the freedom to choose is a higher moral principle. That's the case I'm making.
All right, thank you all for your questions. It looks like we got through all our questions tonight. I'm very happy about that. All right, so we will now close with a short 2-minute closing argument from each speaker, starting with Mr. D'Souza.
I think this has been a really good debate, and one of the reasons I like debating Michael Shermer is not only his irrepressible affability, which always makes these debates with him a pleasure. We've also covered a lot of interesting topics. This has been a really wide-ranging debate, which I've really appreciated, roving over topics that a little distant maybe from our original topic, but nevertheless interesting in themselves. All right, the core question here that we're considering is Christianity on the balance, not in the case of the isolated exception, not in the case of the aberrant example. You could discredit any ideology, any practice by finding those aberrations. You can criticize an ideology based upon the practices of its own mainstream. You can't even criticize an ideology by simply referring to teachings in a book, because people interpret that book differently. And so you can't say, we're going to hold the Christians responsible for this chapter in the book of Deuteronomy. The question you have to ask is, do the actual Christians living in the world right now interpret that verse in this way. Otherwise, you're imposing on them a reading of Deuteronomy that they themselves don't subscribe to. So the problem is that the critique of Christianity that we've heard today does not apply to any actual Christians. It is a sort of a worry about the kind of Christians that the vast, vast majority of Christians have nothing to do with and would very happily join Michael Shermer in deploring. When we talk about history and the American founding, okay, let's look at the most secular of the founders. Jefferson, Franklin, were probably the least devout. And yet, this same Jefferson, this man of the Enlightenment, this man of science, when he was asked to identify the source of our rights, not just our moral rights, but all our rights, he could only think of one, the Creator. And this same Jefferson, although very secular, very skeptical about the aspects of revelation in the Bible, would sit with the scissors and cut out things in the Bible he didn't like. This same Jefferson, when he really began to think about important moral issues, issues that affected him directly, like slavery, he owned 200 slaves. The interesting thing about Jefferson is his vocabulary suddenly became deeply religious and specifically Christian. If you listen to Jefferson's comments about slavery, can the Almighty take sides with us in such a contest? I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just. Suddenly, this Christian morality that he was otherwise almost derisive about comes right back. Why? Because there's no other vocabulary in which he can express the moral seriousness of that issue. And the same with Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was a little bit irreverent and very irregular in going to church. But once it came time to go to Gettysburg, and once it came time for the second inaugural, you'll suddenly notice that Lincoln goes all Christian on us and begins to talk in a very theological way. Just as after 9/11, this same secular America forgot all its secularism and began to suddenly speak in the kind of language that the Pilgrims spoke in when they first came onto these shores. The point is that Christianity is with us, it is around us, and even for guys like Michael Shermer, it's in us. And what we're here to do ultimately is not to praise it or to damn it, but to recognize it and to see that it has done a great deal for this country and for its politics. And ultimately, at the end of the day, even the secular guy should, even if a little grudgingly, say, thank God for Christianity. Thank you.
Well, Dinesh, I would gladly give you a sandwich. You are deserving of that. Well, so I think I'm going to slightly take back my answer on the two candidates identical, one atheist, one theist. I think I would vote for the atheist, not just because he's part of my tribe, although I'm sure I have that, like everybody else, the emotional tribalism. But the propensity to believe that there are supernatural forces at work in the world is irrational. And if you believe that, what else do you believe? So that's my concern. And furthermore, the belief that this supernatural agent can impart to us absolute, real moral values that are true and everybody else's that don't agree with that are wrong, that makes it much more difficult for a functional democracy to operate, which requires considerable flexibility and nuanced thinking to understand the other guy's position and to compromise and go through the rough and tumble process of a democracy that an absolute moral system is not conducive to. Now, I mentioned Christianity's gone through an enlightenment. Most Christians are very tolerant. Hardly any of them come to my door anymore. So the examples I gave there, sure, certainly they are minor compared to, say, more religions that are more intolerant. So, nevertheless, the long-term trajectory over the last several centuries has been more and more secular liberal democracies. There were 0 in 1900. Not one country allowed women to vote. Now there's something on the order of 87 liberal democracies in the world. This is the long-term trend. Things are getting better, thanks mostly to the idea of expanding the moral sphere to include everybody in the tribe. And that's a value I claim that does not come from religion. That's an enlightenment value that we've more and more been embracing. To the extent that religions have made that transition, some of them, that's good. But the idea that they're leading that is not true historically. And so I think part of the problem with turning to our founding fathers is that they didn't have an answer that we have today. Well, I don't know where morals came from. They came from the Creator, however you mean that. Well, we don't have to make that argument anymore. We know where morals come from. We have a good evolutionary explanation for the origins of the moral sentiments and the historical trajectory of how we treat other people and so on. We can give that answer now. And so when the founding fathers set up the Republic to be self-governing, they believed that people need internally, a self-governor, and they couldn't think of anything else other than religion, because they didn't have an answer. Now we have an answer. We have good secular reasons for why. In other words, it's good to be nice to other people for goodness sake and for no other sake. It's just good to be kind to other people, and we should reinforce that for no other reason than in and of itself, it's a good moral value, regardless of what your religious beliefs are. Thank you.